on to the next segment. We're going to move over to the NHL for a little bit and talk about a comment that Nashville Predators general manager Barry Trotz made regarding the. We're talking about taxes. This is a tax podcast now. Get hyped, people. We're talking about how taxes work in the NHL and in every sport because it affects every sport. But in the NHL, again, in every sport, it's common knowledge that some teams have a slight advantage when it comes to negotiating contracts regarding the fact that some teams just are in states that have more lenient taxes. Yes, that is the way that you would put that. The teams that are listed to have the biggest advantage are the Florida Panthers, the Tampa Bay Lightning, the Vegas Golden Knights, the Dallas Stars, and the Seattle Kraken. Which, if you kind of look across that entire thing, you would notice a few patterns, especially out of the first four teams I listed. The Seattle Kraken sort of getting a bit of a pass considering the fact that they're newer, and they've had their successes, but obviously the Florida Panthers just won last year. Tampa Bay went on that incredible run towards the end of the 2010s. Vegas Golden Knights were just there. Like they were really good last year. They just won a cup. Dallas has been there for the last few years. They've looked good on multiple occasions, and like I said, the Kraken are new, but that's been the conversation that this is sort of this brings up something that people have been talking about for a while in the fact that how does that affect teams' abilities to bring in players? Like, do players sign for less on teams that have easier taxes, or states that have easier taxes so that they can technically make more money? Is that actually a thing? And obviously Barry Trotz thinks that's the case, saying that there is no question that teams in tax-free states have advantages. So I guess I'll toss that over to you, Caleb, just with the opening headline question. Do you think that it actually is a factor in times like free agency and with stuff like that? Do you think it actually impacts teams' ability to bring in players?
I mean, I'm sure it does. I think it depends on a lot of things. It's one factor of many that creates an advantage for people. It's a pretty significant one because a lot of the times in contract talks, I think you made this point before the episode saying $7 million in one place is not going to be the same as $7 million in another place, right? We see that even like in Canada, like you're not going to get the same not going to get the same level of wealth that you would necessarily in American.
You want to talk about
American.
Never mind. I was thinking more just like American dollar to Canadian dollar. You want to talk about something? We're paying $90 for NCAA 25. That shit's dumb.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's that kind of stuff that makes a big difference and adds up. And specifically with I believe it's whether they have state income tax or not. When you're making that much money, that percentage, whatever it is, I'm sure different from state to state. I can't say that I know exactly which states have which numbers.
Yeah.
But that percentage is going to be a decent chunk of your contract. It's not going to be insignificant. The one thing I will say, though, is that not every player, when they go into a contract negotiation, is going to say, get me as much money as possible. Because some players are going to have different kind of variables when it comes to what contracts they want, or which teams they want to play with, or what their priorities are. And I think Trotz brings this up in this interview, which I thought was really interesting. So, obviously, two players that they signed. Players that are serial winners, guys that have gone deep, have good careers, and made a lot of money. It doesn't go that far, but it does help the middle group a little bit. For the elite players, the top players, they're just looking for a place that's serious about winning, wants to win, fit in their window. Oh, look at that. You got the...
I know. I grabbed like a whole graphic.
The real deal.
And this shows that if if players want to make the most amount of money, you should be going to Alaska, because that is where you will have to deal with absolutely no taxes at all, apparently, on your income. But this pretty much shows exactly what we were talking about, though, with obviously Florida, Texas, Nevada, Washington. there you go. That pretty much lists all the teams, I think. Oh, wait, Tennessee. Wait, Tennessee's 0%?
Nashville.
Oh, Nashville. Ah, didn't even think about it.
That's why Barry Trotz is talking
Yeah,
about it.
no, there you go. I don't know why that was such a just popped out of my head. And this even shows like the fact that even when you're not looking at just 0%, there's still a very, very large difference across the entire thing. Like, for example, I'm going to pick one out off my ass here. Give me a second. Arizona, 5.1% there compared to California, which is 14%. There's not a team in Arizona anymore, but shut up. Don't worry about it. Like,
you need to just go one state up and go to Utah. Go to Utah.
That's true. That's true. Utah is basically the same amount, but there's even a large difference.
You
in
can
that.
relocate the argument just like you relocated the team.
Exactly. There you go. But that is the funny thing, right? Where like, obviously, players in California are having to give up 15% of their income, and I don't know. It certainly is a factor. I think saying that it isn't a factor, like, to a player that might be looking, if a player's looking at, okay, my two biggest offers are $10 million from the LA Kings and $10 million from the Dallas Stars. Like, it's not a hard choice at that point. At least not if you're just looking at the money. It's not a hard choice. And I think you made a really good point. And I think it was was it you or Barry Trotz that made this point? That's the question.
Was both.
It was both. Maybe it was both. But it was the point that a lot of players obviously do care about winning. And that's a big part of it too, right? Like, players are willing to give up that extra buck or extra 10%, for example, to go to a winning team. And obviously that's there as well. But when that winning team is in a state that's on 0%, that's a big factor too, right? Like, I'm sure that's, for example, again, if we want to talk about a player that might be looking at they're looking at the Dallas Stars and they're looking at the Colorado Avalanche. Two teams that are very good in the West. They both obviously have a chance to win the Cup next year. If you are just looking at it, and then if you look at both those teams, they're fairly even, and then you look at the money, that 5% kind of hurts. Like, sure,
Yeah.
It's funny because we're talking about, like, they're millionaires. They can give up that 5%. It don't matter. But, like, we're talking about, like, you know what I mean. I don't know. I'm tired. But I'm tired and we're talking about math.
Said, it's it's the middle of the road players, right? Like, that's the other point he made, because, like, it's not just the, like, players who are, like, near the end of their careers and just want to win. It's the players who have already made a lot of money, right? Where they don't care. They don't necessarily care as much anymore. They can take a little bit of a pay cut to win. I think you made another good point there that I think should be kind of emphasized, is the whole, I think it is a chicken or the egg problem, right? Do teams turn into winning teams because they have this tax-free exemption, right? Like, you say players, like, will maybe care more about going to a winning team than just going to a team without the tax-free income. But are these winning teams, just in general, created by the fact that they can draw in some of these middle-level free agents with the tax exemptions? I do think hockey is probably the not best is not the word I want to use. Best example of how this has kind of impacted it, because I do think to a certain extent a lot of it,
right? I'm trying to bring up a graphic right now to talk about, because this feels insane compared to the American ones, but I guess it makes sense. I think
Canada's a whole different ballpark. I don't think it necessarily works the same way. I think we'd have to get into the weeds on this.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how accurate I don't know taxes. I don't know. I do my taxes and I don't make a lot of money.
This might be federal plus.
Is it?
Plus,
who knows? I have no idea.
That feels a little bit absurd.
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to take the graphic off the screen. Do not trust the stats you hear about taxes on the Trick Play podcast. We are not. Don't talk to your accountant.
This is not a discussion about. This is not a discussion about the intricacies of how it works. I'm sure you can find that somewhere else. This is just a discussion about how it could potentially affect people in the broad scheme of things. If I see any comments like, excuse me, guys, that's not how state income tax works. I don't know. I don't care. This is a sports podcast.
I don't make income in the States, so...
Yeah, exactly.
Hell, in Canada, I understand how my bracket works. I also understand that my position and an NHL player's position is probably very different with taxes. So
Very different. Yeah.
yeah, because in Canada it's a very very different ball game, like you said. So yeah,
And
we're just talking about the
not just
idea on the hockey side. Maybe we should move away from the numbers, but and
yeah,
more move
and
back
to
onto
kind
the
of
sports side.
to move away from the numbers, I do think I want to say, I do think the NHL is almost the biggest example of this, just because you look at the teams on that list that have the tax exemption, aside from a couple exceptions, are generally the best teams in the league. I believe the stat was 4 out of the 5 last Stanley Cup champions have been teams with a tax exemption. You look at Tampa twice, Florida, Vegas, right? I think that's a big deal, and it's why I think it's become more of a conversation in the NHL. But I think the counterpoint to this, to say, well, it doesn't really matter as much, is a couple of things. A, looking at other sports. Let's say the NFL, right? Same issue here, even bigger contracts, so even bigger amount would be taken away from the players with state income tax. Are the best teams necessarily in Florida, Tennessee, like Washington, all those states? No, not necessarily, right?
No.
The Dolphins are pretty good. The Jaguars are okay. The Bucks are okay, right?
Seattle's
You look
okay.
at like the Titans. Seattle is fantastic. It's the only time this doesn't apply. Tennessee.
I had to say it because you weren't gonna.
No, I'm not. No, Seattle is the one exception to this rule that we're not going to talk about because they're fantastic and going to win the Super Bowl next year. So it kind of invalidates my whole point. But Tennessee is pretty ass. I'm sure you can extrapolate this out to some other sports too. I mean, you look at like the MLB. I know I don't know the MLB as well, but I know like the Marlins aren't necessarily doing great. The Rays aren't necessarily doing great right now. They were in the past, but not necessarily right now. It's teams in the MLB. It's still teams like the Yankees, despite having that high. Yeah, Astros are good. Maybe they had an off year this year. The other thing, what the Astros connects well to, which is the second argument against this, is that we would have seen more sustained success from the teams with low income tax. It's not like this has been a thing throughout the span of the NHL, right? The Panthers were bad for 30 years before they won a cup, right?
True.
Like I think that's the big argument, to say like, oh, like if it's so easy when you have no income tax, you just entice all the free agents to go there. Then why didn't Florida do it earlier, right? And I think this kind of goes to the point, which I think you could probably elaborate on. You brought it up. This just having the state income tax benefit does not create a championship caliber team, because that only helps marginally with one area of team building, and that's free agency.
Well,
Like,
exactly.
you even look at some of these teams, like the Florida teams, like you were saying, it was more about drafting and developing these players that really made the difference. So I think that's where you can kind of go back and say, even though it's definitely a thing, it could definitely maybe sway some contract negotiations one way or another, it's not the end all be all.
Yep. And if team building was all about free agency, my Lakers would have won the last 10 NBA championships. Like, it's free agency is only a portion of it, right? Like, your ability to attract star talent will only get you so far. At the end of the day, most teams win with guys they drafted. That's just generally the case. Either guys they drafted or guys they developed. Like, sure, it usually helps to be able to bring in star talent. We're seeing that now. Like, it's not like this. It's not like the stat we obviously have been talking about this whole time, with 4 of the last 5 Stanley Cup champions playing tax-free states. It's not like that's not a factor. I think I need to emphasize that. It's still obviously a factor, but I think the thing we need to talk about, even if we want to, is it helps good teams get better. Like, mediocre management, it's not going to save you. It's not enough. It's 5%. It's 10%. It's not a big enough amount to actually be able to, like, completely overhaul a bad team. Like, for example, I think the Florida example is terrific, because they have tried to bring in guys in the past through free agency to try and, like, makes something happen. I think Roberto Luongo at the end of his career, Yager, like I'm sure like those are the two that pop into my head, obviously. But like I'm sure there's tons others of players who would go there. Maybe it's just for the money, but trying to help that team get better. I think it helps good teams improve. It doesn't turn bad teams into good teams, and I think that's the big thing. What I do think is a factor is, and we just saw it with the Lightning. It without a doubt probably helps you retool when you have to move on, and helps you stay good. Obviously, we just saw them lose Steven Stamkos and bring in Gensel, which is going to be a pretty big deal for them and probably keeps them contending. And I think even with hell, if we want to keep Vegas, I guess is the argument because they did the exact opposite. They lost a lot of players in this free agency, but Florida obviously kept Sam Reinhart. They kept a lot of their pieces, at least for now, and Dallas has been able to stay as a playoff team for the last. It's been a good while since they've been bad at this point. I think for the most part, it helps good teams stay good, but it's not going to be the reason that. I don't even know. It's not going to be the reason the Kraken become the Florida Panthers, for example, right? This is not saying this is not saying to put all of your money on the Kraken to win the cup in 3 years. This is saying that they have that help. Like
they have one advantage.
They have one advantage, exactly. Like there's a lot of other things. I mean, the funny thing is like a lot of these teams also have those advantages, except for maybe the Kraken. In like obviously just in like warm weather states, for example.
Weather cities.
Yeah, like you see that obviously Florida. Don't have to tell you about that one, but Vegas, Dallas, Texas, and Nevada. But like they're all warm weather areas, right? Like so, I'm sure that's a factor as well. Nashville is probably
it's in the
hot.
south, yeah.
Yeah, it's probably hot. I can't say I've ever been to Nashville,
it's no Florida, but it's not. It's not up north.
It's a warm weather state.
Yeah,
it's a warm weather state. It's not quite Florida, but yeah, it's a warm weather state. So I think I don't know. I'm sure it's a factor, but there's a lot of other things that go into free agency too. So like obviously ability to win, warm weather state, which we just talked about, like. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of things other than this.
Every player is going to be different with that too, right?
Absolutely.
Like I think because it's like these kind of advantages that you have. Yes, they are broad advantages across the board, but with some players they're not going to apply at all. I think the big example that I see with this is John Tavares, where he was the number one free agent on everybody's board a couple of years ago, and even though those teams still had the advantage of being tax-free, and I'm sure that would have been nice, John Tavares chose to go to Toronto mainly because of two reasons. A, ability to win, but B, and I think most crucially, this was his childhood team, his childhood dream to go and play for his hometown Maple Leafs.
I think right? Toronto has signed a lot of players off that. Like, there's a lot of players who probably have played in Toronto and signed with it. For example, Max Domi, literally, like, he just signed an extension, and he, in his, like, announcement of it, came out, or, like, whatever he put online, came out and said, it is so awesome to be able to stay playing for my, like, team that I grew up with. Like, that's cool. Like, players want to be able to do that, right? They want to be able to say that they were a member of the team that they grew up cheering for. So I think, like, absolutely, that's a huge factor. I think, and the fact that, like, a good portion of the Canadian players in the NHL, I don't know the percentage off the top of my head, but a good portion of them come from Ontario. I'm sure they grew up Leafs fans. Like, that's there you go. The Leafs have like a big, like, they have something they can rely on there to help them get free agents. So there you go. Like, it's not just a money thing. It's not about the money, Spider-Man.
I think that's a good way to kind of almost wrap it up too, is just to say, like, for people who get really upset about the whole tax-free state thing, it's like, oh, like, it's totally unfair, like, I don't know, they should have a higher salary cap or something, or whatever. All of these arguments to just, like, whine and
salary cap,
yeah,
to, like,
to just
so
like,
that the people
all of
in
these
those
arguments
areas,
and things,
yeah,
all of the things that people can say to complain, to be like, oh, like, this state has an advantage, like, this is terrible, boo hoo hoo, whatever it may be, whatever the complaint may be, every team is going to have their advantages and disadvantages. You're never going to be able to level the field of free agency and try to level out all these advantages and disadvantages. If you're a team in one of these states that doesn't, or provinces that doesn't have this tax-free exemption, then yeah, it sucks. Like, it sucks if you lose out on a free agent because of this. I think of the NFL, like, the one big one would be like Tyreek Hill saying, yes, I chose Miami over going to the Jets because they don't have taxes in Florida. Went out and said that. So obviously big loss. But again, like we pointed out with the last example, that can come down to a million different things. You're never going to be able to completely even the playing field when it comes to something as volatile as free agency. So while it may suck for your team, if you don't have this advantage, there will be other advantages that you have. And it may not be perfectly even across the board, but it will never be. So that's ultimately just kind of what it comes down to is, yes, it's uneven, yes, it's unfair, but this is an uneven, unfair sport, and it's never going to be the end-all be-all to whether your team is good or not.
Does help though. Give the Flames more money in free agency, please, but only the Flames. That'd be just lovely.
I'd go for that.
Yeah, I feel
I'd
like
go
we
for
need
that.
it. I feel like we need it. Just like give us an extra like 15 million. Everyone else can just like figure it out, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, it might help.
Pocket
It might
change.
not. Probably wouldn't, but it's okay.